If this goes on, don't panic. Bringing hope to the world through speculative fiction.
Hey all, this is Alan. Welcome to another episode of our Solarpunk column. We decided to keep this column running into 2024, though due to the larger number of columns running this year, there will be 3 instead of 4. As we did last year, each Solarpunk column will be written by a team of creatives from the Solarpunk community. If you are interested in Solarpunk and want to learn more, you can look back to a number of our interviews in which we talk with important people within that community, including Andrew Dana Hudson, Sim Kern, Rem Wigmore, Francisco Verso, and the editors of Solarpunk magazine, Justine Norton-Kurtzen, and Brie Castagnazzi. You can also check out last year's columns covering urbanism by Navarre Bartz, anarchism and prefigurative politics by Justine Norton-Kurtzen, and Why We Need to Solarpunk Everything by Susan K. Quinn. You can also check out Navarre's book review column that focuses on Solarpunk and Hopepunk books called Book Navigator. This year, we are going to start with Navarre Bartz's discussion of children in Solarpunk in an episode called Solarpunk Kids Are Free Range. So, Navarre Bartz is an engineer and a father who has dabbled in local politics. You can check out his YouTube channel called Solarpunk Station.
Now that I'm a parent, I've been thinking a lot more about education as well as how we raise kids, especially from the American context, and how a lot of it isn't really consistent with the oppositional ideas of Solarpunk and challenging the status quo. If you talk to any older adults, they'll talk about how when they were kids, they were sent outside and their parents would tell them not to come back until the streetlights came out. But in my own generation, we spent a lot more time inside, and maybe some of the more social people would hang out at the mall, but that was starting to wane during millennial upbringing times. I've seen some studies even showing the increasingly smaller circles of range of children outside as time has progressed in the 20th to 21st centuries, where someone's grandfather might have gone several kilometers from their house, but that keeps shrinking to where in modern times, it's become controversial to let your kids go down the street to pick up milk or bread or whatever staple you need because of the pervasive fear in our society. There are several reasons for this. Many people will be quick to jump and blame social media and technology, but TVs and other forms of media like that have existed for about 100 years at this point, and it's easy to quickly throw technology under the bus. Not that there aren't problems with social media, but I personally don't think this is the main issue. One of the things contributing to this is, of course, the fear-mongering over stranger danger and our increasingly atomized society here in the West, especially in the United States. My understanding from what I've seen is that stranger danger isn't really a thing, not to say that horrible events don't ever happen, but that most kidnappings and things of this nature usually happen as a result of some interfamilial shenanigans. And so most of the time it's not some rando snatching kids off the street so much as it is people going through some family stuff at the adult level and one of the adults coming and taking the kids, which is still bad, but it's not the sort of thing that we talk about as a society. So it's something we need to address of why is this happening? And I'm hoping that in a Solarpunk future, we'd see more mental health care and nonviolent communication skills and things of this nature, helping alleviate issues between adults more amicably and not having that shoved off onto children and having to deal with that themselves. Another thing, which isn't totally wild, is that people are afraid their kids will get hit by cars. And to no one's surprise, I'm going to circle this back to land use and development patterns and how the car-centric model we've taken as our one true development model here in the United States has led to kids being less and less able to go out on their own and have parents feel safe doing that. I remember talking to my grandfather and him talking about them getting their very first car, that his brother was the first person in their family who had a car. They'd seen them before, but they didn't have one. They weren't widespread in the 1920s and 30s when he was growing up. And back during the 20s and 30s in the United States, there was actually a fairly large movement. Most people have heard about Mothers Against Drunk Driving these days, but there were Mothers Against Driving. Kids played in the street. Even during the early industrial era, you could hear a horse coming. You knew how fast it would go. Everything was very still human scale. Even in places where you had electric trolleys, they were just sort of bumbling down the street. Cars could go anywhere in the street. They were often piloted heedlessly. And so we started to see some of the very first traffic deaths in the United States from especially kids getting hit by cars. And understandably, people were pretty angry about this. Unfortunately, cars were of course driven by the rich folks because they were expensive. And as we all know, money greases the wheels of politics. So instead of having cars curtailed, instead they took over the road, and we get things like jaywalking, penalize people from being in the street where people belong, and cars have become the primary users of the road as far as the law is concerned, even though the streets were originally for people and not machines. The reliance, too, of the United States on the car as a primary form of transport and widespread denigration and defunding of public transit here has resulted in kids not being able to have freedom of movement like older people would once they acquire a driver's license. It makes freedom of motion outside those few bastions of public transit here in the United States very difficult, which always makes it extra special when people use kids as reasons that we have to have cars, and you couldn't possibly invest in bicycling or pedestrian or public transit infrastructure because, that would screw over families. Not to say that there aren't lots of families who do use vehicles on the street, but I think if anyone took more than an hour to look at how we do land use here in the United States, we'd very quickly see that I think we can scale back the car infrastructure quite a bit, and you're still going to be just fine in your SUV, Karen. Moving a little bit further away from land use and more into the actual childhood experience. One of the things that's especially come up for me recently is looking at education and how schooling is done, kind of the bridge between those two. I saw some Europeans were flabbergasted that despite the fact that we don't really do public transit very well here in the United States, we do have very widespread public transit for a very, very specific population, and that's the school bus systems across the country. That's only purpose is to run buses to ferry kids back and forth to school. There were a few European commenters who thought it was absolutely wild that instead of having adequate public transit that kids could take to go to school, we invested in building an entire public transit network just for the schools, and we're wondering how that made any sort of fiscal sense. And I mean, I can't really argue with them because it's kind of wild. So once kids are ferried on their own semi-private public transit network to school, schools here in the United States are still based on the Prussian model, which was designed to indoctrinate people into being good subjects of the state, or what has become now both the state and whoever your boss is. The modern version includes all of your fun stuff for industrial workers, like bells to change classes, just like you'd have bells at the factory. But training people to do exactly what someone in authority tells you to do at exactly the right time is not really the vibe we're going for with Solarpunk. Solarpunk is very anti-authoritarian, and schools in the United States are run like prisons. So what would a Solarpunk school look like? Very, very loose definition of school. I envision it being a lot closer to, say, a library, or other examples we have for democratic schools as in democracy, not the political party, or the Purple Thistle that was in Vancouver that was sort of a youth-led educational space. Places where you can go as a kid or maybe even adult. Maybe we don't age segregate it like we do now. There's certainly value in maybe having times you at least know if you're a parent that your kid's going to be there, but you can arrange that on your own time and not make it compulsory. That kids can go in. They have tons of resources, all the stuff they could read or watch or do. And there are people there who can help guide them, the librarians, or if you want to give them some cool new title, that's awesome. But kids can go there. They can learn about things. They can learn how to do things. Some public libraries are doing a good job of integrating makerspace tools like 3D printers or audiovisual equipment and things like this into their programs. So kids have access to these tools that they might not at home, or better quality ones than you could get at home. And also offering that collaboration space with other people. And in this environment, you can learn and do it with your own agency, with your own, I want to do this thing, so I'm going to learn it, and not someone telling you, you have to learn this because if you don't do well on this test, you won't be able to get a scholarship to maybe afford to go to a school that you might be able to get into, so you can maybe get a good job and maybe make a living, as opposed to learning how to do something you're passionate about and getting the skills you want to be able to do that to whatever level you want, whether that's just for fun or, there is a certain amount of pressure in our current environment to learn things so you can monetize them, which kind of sucks, but I'm there too. So being able to do that in the current world, as well as trying to strive toward where we're not dependent on working for a living, is totally understandable. And just as far as other options out there as for inspiration, there are Montessori schools and Waldorf schools, nature schools, all the different things of this nature that really put the experience of the child, the learner, as the primary thing. And there are various places along this as far as how much quote-unquote teachers are delivering content versus resources for the students as they run into things. And that might be a more nuanced pedagogical discussion for later. I'm an engineer, not an educator, at least in the formal sense. We did homeschool my brother-in-law, who's much younger than my wife and I, because he was in a rural school district and wasn't doing well in classes there. They didn't really have the resources to address his particular learning style, so we did a mix of homeschool and unschooling with him. And all of these different methods will work better for different people to reach a better outcome for themselves. Some people will say that progressives and solarpunks want to erase individuality and make us all part of some sort of communist Borg collective. And I think that's very missing the point. And probably everyone listening to this already knows that. For solarpunks, we want people to really be able to be individuals, but within the context of their community, so everyone can max out their individuality, so that when you mix everyone back together, you're coming out with something far greater than the sum of its parts. Capitalism wants to make everyone the best they can be as long as it is in the mold of this specific archetype, because otherwise you might not be able to maximize your earning potential, which is really the only thing we think about a lot of the time. There are a lot of other moving parts, like that pressure to be a good citizen, compliant with authority, and all this. It's all mixed up in that desire to use school as a vehicle to increase your earning potential for something that's at least tolerable to do as an adult. But as solarpunks, we should really use our education system to help people figure out who they are and how to be the best them, because if we're all our best selves, when we work together, we're going to come up with much better outcomes than if we're all trying to compete with each other over scraps. I know as a parent, I really want my child to be able to do better than me, and not just I want them to be able to earn more money or whatnot, but I want them to be able to be themselves more, because I know I have a lot of hangups about who I am or how I express myself because of my own childhood experiences. So I'm trying to figure out how to do that better. I know I'm not going to be perfect, and I think we all have to give ourselves some some grace there on that, but trying to make sure things are a little better for the next generation, and doing that not just through the big global things like fighting climate change and things, but also making sure that their learning and upbringing microclimate is well attuned to help them be their best selves. And I hope regardless of whether you have kids or you don't, or if you are a kid, that we can all work together to build this better world that we need so desperately.